Zane, the guy with the jacket, is our presenter for the day. So you will helping him out. All right. Zane, you're all set for in terms of the live stream. So just checking audio. So it's up and running. So whenever you get rolling, well, it has essentially from the edge of that screen to the other side of the podium. So you got room to walk if you want to. Mics work the whole way around. So great. Enjoy. I'm gonna scoot on and make sure it's back.
Tick. Oh, you're just that's my first centric. Oh, yeah, okay. I think set up. Can everybody hear me okay if I just speak without a mic? It's okay. Okay, great. So I think we'll just get started. I don't know if people come straggling in and whatnot, but we'll get going. So before I introduce myself, the introduction slide here, I wanted to see, well, the image on the left is just kind of an intro image, but the teapot on the right, does anybody know what teapot this is? I just wanted to test and see if there were any nerds of a feather in here that could really nerd out with me on teapots. Okay, so that's kind of an introduction to me a little bit. So no, I'm Zane Jones. I work as an architect here in town. I grew up in Utah and went to school and clicking back here, I'm not sure. there's some timing set up or what. We'll see how this works. So this is an image of my master's thesis project in plan view. So to kind of architect geek on you for a minute, and then we'll go broad and we won't get too zoomed in, because I know I kind of put my partner to sleep at night when I start talking about architecture. But what I studied in Arizona State University, and I was lucky enough to have a couple different professors, one of them in particular, a Mexican professor, and then the other an Argentinian professor. And so one of my interests was designing kind of beautiful places, of course, and sanctuary type spaces that you could, just feel great in. And my professors challenged me to not design it for myself, of course, and to design it for someone else, and in particular, a minority culture, or at least one that was in the press at the time. This was back in 2011 is when I finished this, but immigration issues in Phoenix, of course, have been around for a long time. So it was a hot topic, Sheriff Joe Arpaio, et cetera. So anyway, this is kind of where I wanted to set myself, or set the presentation up anyway, in that architects and designers in particular, we're not supposed to design for ourselves, ideally. A lot of us have pretty big egos, and our goal anyway, a good one, is to shed that ego, and you're supposed to try to step into someone else's shoes and design for someone else. So a little bit about the presentation, talking about the architecture of inclusive societies. I'm going to include a couple different type of what I'd call designers. So there's the architect, myself. We're kind of in the building. We geek out on doors and chairs and stuff like that. There's urban planners, community planners, landscape architects or landscape planners. They deal with everything outside of the building, public space in particular. So we cross paths a lot, of course. And then there's another group of you can call them designers, but a lot of it is more preservation of design. So historic preservationists, and also it's a lot more common to call them cultural preservationists as well now. So it's really important, those. And then other important key players are policymakers and advocates that are you guys in the audience. So to talk a little bit about architects, to set the standard, I guess, we've got the Pritzker Prize. That's the international prize for kind of the biggest, best, coolest architect in the world. And this was one of the first ones in 1979. It's got those signature glasses. I love how they put the font right in front of those glasses to make it real cool. And as you know, you can Google Instant Architect, and they have a nice kit there for you that echoes this guy's glasses. So if you want your Halloween costume that just passed. But I wanted to show how that's changing. So the first female architect to receive the award was in 2004, Zaha Hadid, an Iraqi architect, fantastic, just off the charts, amazing stuff. I'm not that bold, she's incredibly bold. 2017, there's been couples or partnerships that have won the award, but this was the first time that kind of a collaborative group of architects won the award. So it marks a shift in collaboration versus kind of the iconic starchitect, they like to call him, which very ego heavy. And then 2018, Indian architect of Hindu descent, and in particular, designing cultural projects was this year's recipient. So planners, no, that is not the same guy. So as you see, it was a trend for a while, a big trend. And I did choose an ominous picture of, this is Le Corbusier. He's a French architect and planner, well, Swiss French. But today, of course, planners are heading into city departments. They are organizations and departments within cities, and then they're becoming much more diverse. This is a really good thing. So that historic preservationist, similar, I couldn't find the same one, but this was actually one of the first images that came up when I researched it. So apparently the glasses and gray hairs was in. But again, those are becoming much more diverse and opening a lot more eyes. So to start this, I wanted to show that we are oh, sorry about that. Okay, so we are put in parameters. There is some law that we have to follow as architects and designers that we are forced to be inclusive of people. They broke down those egos and they passed laws, and unfortunately it was only in 1990 that the Americans with Disabilities Act was passed. It was quite the evolution to get there. There was a lot of federal training and whatnot, but so this Americans with Disabilities Act, it's a physical or mental impairment, and it governs all sorts of things so anyone can access this building is the theory behind it. But as I wanted to present today, that's changing. And ADA, or Americans with Disabilities Act, is a minimum. It really is. And I don't know why this keeps switching back. I apologize for that, you guys. So this is a accessible icon project. The sign we see everywhere. Design activists and are collaborating to create a new icon to help us break down our biases on that old icon and maybe include a different image or thought. So this is a good image of it overlaid across the other one. I don't want to encourage graffiti, but I thought it was really cool. So another thing is what abilities are not physical and mental impairments. How do you design for mental impairment? So they're not always visible. They're not always shown. So this is also super, super geeky. If you know this designer here on the right.
Cattle feedlot?
Oh, yes. Oh, man, I need to throw some candy or something. I am very impressed. Yeah, so who designed this? Temple Grandin, yeah, wow. Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, also an alumni from my school. She is a very, I would consider famous or very well-known autistic designer. So she had pretty special gifts. It's an incredible documentary, just Temple Grandin documentary, but which kind of goes into this. But she paid attention to things differently than most designers. And in particular, she had an affinity. She grew up on farms and she had an affinity for animals and understood them in a much different way. And designed this out of her heart, but it wasn't adopted until the cattle lots and the industry saw that it improved results. So even though it's a wonderful thing and it helped bring more humane slaughtering into cattle slaughtering facilities, which may not be pleasant for some, but anyway, it's something to think about. So this is moving towards what I would say most designers in the profession kind of consider. ADA is kind of accepted as the minimum. So we try to strive for what's called universal design, which has all sorts of more inclusive ideas behind it. And in particular, India has a universal design organization and principle that they include in one of their principles, cultural design too, which is important. So we don't see that here. This is the American and Western version of it. So maybe you see yourself up there in one of those icons, maybe you don't. And that's kind of what I wanted to ask. This is the super wordy definition, but the big part is that it should be regardless of age, size, ability, or disability. So it should be any body type, any age of a body type should be able to enter a space and use that space. But can anybody else name something in a public space that you would, or a type of person or personality or anything that you need to design for?
Crowds, tourists getting off ships.
Yeah.
Coming into town.
Yeah. And who's in those crowds that's maybe it's not their age, size, or their ability? Is there something, we'll give some hints here, but some of these things, hot topics, gender, restrooms, those are a huge issue right now. Sexuality, ethnicity, these things, are they designed for? There's no sort of regulation. And of course, it'd be pretty difficult to regulate some of this, and that I have my own opinions on that. But even on this, is there anything else that we need to consider when we design our built environment that we live in here? What about our little furry friends that we have at home? Again, Temple Grandin, she was thinking about the farming industry. What about the wildlife around us? We even think about that. And then also, not only is it supposed to be accessible for someone, it's supposed to be safe. As architects, I think we have the reputation for having those circular glasses and being really kind of, pompous and dressed well. But really, we're supposed to be making safe spaces for everyone and not just ourselves. But yeah, question?
I don't see anything here on environmental impact.
Oh yeah, natural environment was kind of what I was considering. Yeah, which exactly. Things like emissions and energy use, all that stuff. It falls under our umbrella. This keeps resetting there. Oh, okay, there we go. So I skipped ahead. We'll just go right ahead. So, and this is maybe a term that some of you are getting familiar with. It's one that I'm just getting familiar with, but intersectionality. And one of the important parts that I think even preparing this presentation was, at least the concept of intersectionality is that issues of power, oppression, systematic power, that sort of thing, it's really complex. Nobody is just one thing. And so as designers, we're supposed to design universally for everyone. It's a hugely complex issue. So it's something that we just have to work very hard on. So I'll talk about how this guy approached it, and then we'll see how maybe some people today are approaching it. So, so Corbusier, sorry, that keeps starting over. Oh, I just gave away my slide there. Corbusier, our ominous looking guy, he does have some more friendly smiles, but our ominous looking planner architect, he was during high modernism. So kind of post-war times where everybody was disillusioned with the world and it was kind of tossed away the old and you started the new. It was industrial revolution sort of stuff. And so things were sleek. They were machines for living. And that was his big shtick. And so he did, shed a lot of those old traditions that were bad in a lot of ways. And he had a concept called the radiant city, which he wanted to bring in open space. He wanted to bring in light. He wanted to bring in kind of uniformity and this kind of just beauty that they had. And then he was also influenced by other cultures and wanted to design for other cultures. He, in fact, had a relationship for some time with an African-American lady who introduced him to jazz and other things. So he tried to do his best. And then we have this guy today, Michael Ford. If you get a chance to see this TED Talk, please take a look at it. So he's maybe he gives his critique of Le Corbusier. So here's Corbu, and this is kind of what Michael Ford says Corbu was doing. He took jazz and he took his partner that he was being introduced to, and he tried to do all these things, and then he did actually design big, large communities for folks. And I kind of lump him in with what modernism was and what it tried to do. And what happened is basically things came crumbling down, and the way economics and social class and all these things work, when you try to prescript something on a people or a culture or a way of life, it often doesn't work. It's super complex. I think there was a quote from that Michael Ford presentation that basically was saying that about modernism, about Corbu's designs in particular, that they were so orderly, they made you long for disorder, basically because they were just too perfect, if you will. So, and again, from Michael Ford's presentation, a little Snoop Dogg quote there, which is his thing is that hip hop was rapping and critiquing about the places they lived that were failing. And so it inspired him as an architect to say, why are those spaces failing? And so this is kind of the textbook example when we're in school, that modernism fails at this moment in time when this famous project, the Pruitt-Igoe project, was demolished. It was a project that was supposed to be, subsidized housing, create this, see this nice open space. It's got some uniformity. There's space for people. They were supposed to have, access to work nearby. Anyway, it brought on a whole host of problems, and then was eventually condemned and demolished. So Michael Ford brings hip hop into groups, and in particular into cultures that he grew up in, and has them design spaces. So imagine this group and how many perspectives they bring compared to that singular architect or that singular planner that's trying to create their ego vision, if you will. So yeah, what if women designed cities? Just taking it out of this architect man that has won the awards for many, many years. So a little bit past Corbu's time, but they did overlap. But Jane Jacobs also kind of had those glasses that were kind of nerdy. So she fit a bit of the mold, if you will. But anyway, she is really awesome. She's like a idol to me. She's incredible. She was pretty small and tiny is how they describe her. Almost a little bit mousy, but just like a lion heart. Apparently, she just was relentless. And so her quote, I think this was one of them that embodies her writing and her mission in life anyway, is that basically you have the people create things. And that's how everybody is represented. And you embrace the complexity of it instead of trying to force your own vision on things. So we'll kind of go into that in a second too. But my partner, she shared this one with me. Apologies. So yeah, this is it's funny because I literally worked, one of the first architecture offices I worked in had a glass hallway on the second floor, right above the elevator. Super awkward. So this one, and then she got a bunch of retweets, well, what if they made those men have to wear high heels or, carry a child or all these other things? And it was quite the hilarious string to look up. So if you want to look it up, just Google that one. It's pretty good. But this lady is a good TED Talk as well. If you haven't noticed, I steal a lot from TED because they're pretty amazing. But she has Lucy Turnbull. She's worked for the UN quite a bit and has done a lot of international work. So it's not just American women. She has, and basically, throughout the world internationally, if women were the designers, and this is kind of based on a lot of what they would want, is that cities would be much more walkable, safe, and convenient. And why would you guys think that instead of a man being the designer? Anybody have an idea why a woman would want something more walkable, safe, and convenient? Maybe one of the women in the audience could.
We're forever looking out for our own safety in public.
Yeah, I giggle, but that is very true. And the walkable and convenient part of it. Oh yeah, go ahead.
Taking a cranky kid for a walk is 1,000 times easier than putting a cranky kid in the car.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and having kids makes you extremely busy. Having a career and kids makes you way more busy. A lot of guys can afford the luxury of not having so much to do. So basically, she found that women multitask way more than men. And so cities that are designed by women often things are much closer together. They're safer. You can walk to and from, and it's not a Walmart per se. It's not a one-stop shop, but that's kind of the concept. You need things that save time for you. So circling back to Jane Jacobs, we all know she's made it because she's been Google search artwork. So, and also those signature glasses just like really popped again. So Jane Jacobs wrote this book, which was a heavy critique of modernism and what had been done before, which basically was that egotistical, or at least that designer that was, waving the hand over these models, these, city models, and saying what they want. So in good form, if you want another movie recommendation. She took on one of those real estate developers, big New York developer and also planner, but Robert Moses was his name, and he had some pretty grand ideas that were straight out of a lot of modernism, bringing more cars into New York, cutting, big highway swaths right through lower income neighborhoods, which often were things like the Chinatown and some of these other neighborhoods that were hugely cultural, partly because of that diversity and that complexity. And, this was money. This was money just bringing these things in. And so Jane was the champion for that and showed how cutting these communities off from other parts of the city would just, ruin them, and it would just make things worse. And so she actually ended up, it was one of those victory moments. So she basically stopped the development from happening and helping preserve a lot of these communities in New York. And as a planner, designer, that thesis project I have, it kind of reminds me of that too. It was actually on a piece of paved over, if you will. It's like a bridge right over the freeway, because the freeway had actually kind of ruined the community right there. And so they had it's basically a mile long that they created a bridge right over the freeway because it had just split the communities. And so that project that I worked on was a place that was re-bridging broken communities. So it's a really important thing to think about. Roads are interesting. So yeah, so this is the trajectory that we're going on, right? We've got ADA is our kind of bare minimum, and then we're evolving. It's happening, and I think there's a lot of good design coming. But what's next? So we'll shift back a little bit too to talk maybe about the past and how important it is and why it's supposed to be preserved. So historic preservationists, of course, they're next level nerdery, and I include myself in that. We often are kind of that old historian in the library, but to be quite honest, I was really blown away. I had the opportunity to go to a national conference this summer on a grant through CBJ on historic preservation, and I do say there were a very diverse historic commissioners from around the nation and very inspiring conversations and topics. And I think who's telling our story and what that story is definitely evolving. So I think there's a lot of hope in that. Apologies for that. So this one, again, historic preservationists. The act was passed a little earlier than the American With Disabilities Act, but preservation also requires that we have to fall in some parameters. So as a preservationist, and I sit on the local CBJ Historic Preservation Commission, we are prescripted to follow some rules. So it only kind of falls, under law when it's a federally funded project, which is unfortunate. But there are a few things that can make some workarounds. But essentially, if it's a federal project, anything like a DOT highway, any of these federal buildings here, if they propose a project, it does come to our desk on the historic committee downtown, and we sit and review it to think if there's any sort of impact on any sort of historic or cultural value. So it's a really cool act. Oh, gosh. So yeah, what is your legacy? What story? What's your culture? Is it being preserved? Is it being told? And is someone else's that you want to be preserved? So this was from a presentation. This is just a screenshot from the San Francisco planning department. So again, planning is becoming a department-based, city-based, and group. A lot more voices are being heard. It's not just the singular planner. But I was able to hear a presentation. So this snapshot is on their LGBTQ plus cultural heritage district that they formed in San Francisco. This is the first of its kind. Really incredible presentation. On how do you take something like a complex culture that's happened, and it's it's a place where the epicenter, so I guess that's my next slide. Maybe this one should have came before it. But so this top image of sparkling's got some nice gold hue on the windows, how all architects like to show their buildings. This was a developer proposed building that was going to go in this Tenderloin district. I'll switch back. So supposed to go in this district, kind of the lower buildings there off to the side of this tall one. They were going to build that right up, right in that triangle, and build this, real nice building that was up high like the other one. Super cool, right? Super, super cool. Well, this would have demolished the Compton's cafeteria, where a real famous riot happened, in particular for transgender folks. It was, of course, a popular lesbian, gay district. But even back then, transgender, and maybe still today, but even back then, they were the biggest minority, if you will, and probably the most, persecuted, if you will. So they had one place to eat at night after they're working, and it was this Compton's cafeteria. And even though it was a very gay-friendly district, it was illegal in San Francisco to cross-dress or dress as another gender. And so this was one of the only places open, and they would call the cops, and even though it was gay-friendly, they would call the cops on the transgender folks because that was illegal, and so they actually could shut down the cafeteria, or they could at least bully them out. Anyway, so there was one night in particular that was just a little too much, and they had enough people and enough gumption that that's an image from it, that they rioted against the police when they came. So it was a really important moment. And so preserving this, how do we preserve this and make this a historic site? So it was a fascinating presentation, and I don't know the details as well as I should, but essentially you have to set up community support for these places. It's not, because you're taking on that developer, right? This slide of text that I just put over top of that beautiful building, there's a lot of money in that beautiful building. So the only way that you can defeat that is through a lot of community support. But what also does a lot of community support do? It makes for pride in place and a community that wants stability and growth and that cares about where they live. So even though you might not get that sparkling building, you've got a community that really is brought together. So it's a pretty incredible thing. And so cultural preservation and historic preservation have a huge impact on creating a great place, not just the sparkling building that the architects like to think about. The pride of place is really important. So new isn't always better per se. But yeah, another topic this summer that I was kind of just blown away and sat back in my seat and listened, but we had historic commissioners from all over the nation, of course, come together, and a lot of them talked about their controversial monuments that were being taken down. It's been in the news a lot, so the Confederate monuments coming down, but I was struck in particular, the little dot up there at Helena. The historic commissioner from Helena got up and spoke a little bit, and I just had no idea that a Confederate monument had made its way all the way up into Helena. And she talked about how they different approaches on how they took it. So some followed things by the book, and basically went through all the long talking assembly meetings and let everyone speak their voices, and some didn't do it in time. And things like Charlottesville happened. And some of the benefits of Charlottesville is that it motivated others to just bypass the system. And one of our jobs as architects and planners is public safety. And so a lot of the commissioners just said, nope, it's a public safety issue. We're just going to not follow the rules, and we're going to take it down because it's a safety issue. Others did it as a fly-by-night thing. They kind of followed the book, if you will, but there was one in particular, I thought it was down by New Orleans, but they basically just had a private property buy up the property and got rid of it in that way. So when it's private, you don't have your city jurisdiction anymore. So it was a very interesting conversation, to say the least. So there are good people on the ground throughout the nation. So what about here in Juneau, bringing it local? Not sure how to turn that off, but. So where's Juno? Is anybody interested in being involved? So doing a little research for one of the projects I'm involved with. This was one of the historic images that we were going to put on some interpretive signage. These folks in the bottom, according to the Alaska State Library, they're, of course they've got their little transit out there. They're architects and engineers and surveyors. They're going to build this building right next to this restaurant, but the glaring sign, of course, is quite obvious that they have all white help in there. And it implies, of course, no natives. And one of the things that we were searching for was the actual image of signs that said no natives allowed, because they were quite prevalent. And we have folks like Elizabeth Pradovich that had written the governor and a lot of documentation, but we're having a hard time tracking down a photo. So this was one of the better ones. But is that the history that we're preserving? Well, there's reason to preserve some of those warts, if you will. Yeah, so how do we get involved? Project that my firm and planning firm, Barb Scheinberg and Associates, and then Pat Race have come together with CBJ Blueprint downtown. And so for all the millennials that just want to log online and do it at the convenience of your home, you can take the survey and you can comment and you can voice what you want the city to be, what things are important to you. And it's actually been super fascinating and really, really great to work on this project. We've had so far, at least this first round that we went through, we had something like 2,600 comments and did surveys. Group of us went out to the bars at night even and did surveys in the bars to see what the nightlife wanted. We did off the cruise ship. We reached out to a lot of different organizations, and we kept track of it by age and location and some of that. And then also if you're a tourist or if you're a local, to see what kind of different thoughts people have, because everybody's got their blind spot depending on where they're at. So that's kind of our goal, is get as many voices as possible. And we're sorting through them on Excel and trying to geek out as best we can. And it is a really beautiful thing when an Excel spreadsheet, just gets it and everything just equals. Oh man, that's just incredible. So another project that firm I work for has been involved with is the Juneau Housing First. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but one of the biggest comments, so the project before that Blueprint, one of the biggest comments we're still having is issues with homelessness in Juneau and how that is being addressed. So phase one, fortunately, has had incredible reviews so far and has made a really big difference. So notice our date on this. This is recent. We're doing phase two and we're designing that up. And again, this is one of those challenges for us as architects and planners and the public too. One of those Pruitt-Igoe warnings, if you will, is things like budgets. You can design a perfect space with an endless budget, but there are realities that make it very difficult. So we have to, as architects and planners, do our best to keep some poetry and some beauty in something that has just a razor thin budget. But please come and comment, please come and support, come to those assembly meetings and say this is the kind of stuff you want CBJ funding to go to. I think it's a really fantastic project. It's been pretty incredible to work on. So if you want to be involved with historic preservation, well, lucky you, there's still comment period open on our draft preservation plan for CBJ. This one, I only sit on the historic committee downtown. So we do have some other consultants, but again, you can log online and say what you want preserved. It's really important to do so. And that's actually the draft report. I can't share, of course, the rest of the draft, but I'm very impressed and very hopeful to see some of the comments in there. Another project that we're involved with, CBJ wayfinding. This is maybe more in the planner's realm than the architects, but I think we were fortunate enough to team up with Mayor Reed. We had some contacts down there. They're a Portland-based signage firm. They do this stuff all the time. So we teamed up with them, and CBJ thought that was a pretty good idea because we're not good enough to do it ourselves. So yeah, they brought some really incredible expertise. And this is just a placeholder draft but the project is basically signage. It's funded by the cruise ship head tax. So it's basically telling the visitors where to go, but we wanted to make sure that locals are represented and stories are told. So this is that project where I said that image was brought up because the interpretive panel, the big one down there at the end, when the cruise ship folks get off the boat, the big sign they first come to, that they orient themselves, it helps tell the story of Juneau. And I wish I could show you some of the draft material, but again, it's in review, so can't quite do that. But we've had fantastic feedback, and a lot of people come out. Tlingit place names are going on the map. Some of the districts are changing names. And proposed anyway. And then like that historic commission that I sit on, the DOT, like those things that come up for review, we got the green sign over Gold Creek to also read the Tlingit name of Gold Creek, Santakihini. And that was a really great moment. I think we've got some great commissioners, some that work for Sea Alaska and such. So anyway, this is a very, very cool project to put on your radar. And if you want to comment, please do. These signs are hopefully going to start going in next spring. So, and like I say, I can't spoil too much, but this is kind of a placeholder design, but essentially it's going to be a form line design on some of these especially these larger totemic looking ones. They're small, but really tall to pull people across Egan and into downtown. Get those tourists down there. So, what is our historic preservation going to be? So I thought this was an interesting progression, if you will. So of course I snuck that little snippet because hopefully it's only a tiny snippet and not any sort of architecture, if you will. But the one on the far left there, the Chief Sanahat in Kasayan, my firm was involved with some of the preservation and some of the just cataloging the details that were there. Of course, the building next, the Sea Alaska Corporation's building, and then the Soboleff Center that our firm worked on as well. Anybody want to play architect critic or architecture critic? And I wish I had the glasses on. I really wish I could have cut those out and handed them with the mic. But anybody want to point out some interesting trajectories or thoughts and play architecture critic for a moment of some of these? Any thoughts on these buildings?
Far right one looks like, well, the tall wood panels remind me of totem poles. With like unwrapped totem poles maybe.
Yeah.
Or inside of it. I thought that was interesting.
There are now 3 house poles on that corner.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it's an older image. Yeah. Yeah. So it's even getting better. Yeah, I think, of course, there's a long tradition of the clan houses. The corporation building, and this is just my architectural critique, so this is not, any sort of get what you pay for. So, it's a nice building, but maybe a comment back there before I get carried away.
I don't know if this is true, but I think the far right building is made out of yellow cedar.
Yeah.
And it has copper piping.
Yep.
I found that really exciting.
Yeah, no, the details are incredible on the building. Yeah, exactly. It's yellow cedar, and it's extra thick yellow cedar, which comes from the clan house tradition, and it's supposed to last longer than metal siding. The really thick yellow cedar, yellow cedar's got some antifungal properties, anti-deterioration properties and it's just some light linseed oil to preserve it for a little bit, and it's supposed to gray out just like the clan house. Which is, yeah, exactly that. And it's, like I say, it's rated to last longer than metal siding, which is kind of your standard in Juneau for a lot of people. And then, yeah, exactly, copper rain gutters and custom copper rain gutters, very important material in Tlingit culture.
One thing's always puzzled me about Juneau architecture in general is why the roofs are flat. With all the rain here, I would have assumed the roofs would be peaked.
That's a very good point. I guess my short answer is when you get really big buildings, their roofs have to get super tall, and that gets really hard. So you just build more waterproof flat slope roofs. But
Why are the roofs now going like, not just flat, but slanted towards the middle? When they redid the library in Sitka where I used to live, we freaked out at that.
yeah, oh yeah.
They're like, the snow's all gonna accumulate here.
Yeah, I worked on the Sitka Library. Yeah, it was crowd control for sure. Yeah, a lot of reasons. Again, architects, one of those things is public safety. Things like icicles are really dangerous. Also, controlling the rain. Sometimes it's preferred over shedding the rain off of the building. So taking them into controlled drains on the interior. It's going to be more a common practice. It might cost a little more, but I think anyway, it's a lot of people still have opinions, and there's a lot of crowd control in Sitka on that one. So yeah, but and we can discuss a little bit more of this, and maybe you guys can throw a few tomatoes at me too. But and my critique only, I think, sorry about that. My critique only, I think the corporation building, it definitely represented the time. They were a force downtown and a corporate force. It was very corporate and dressy and very much of the time, and it represents successful business, I think, in American culture anyway. The next building, the Soboleff Center, it takes some of that and makes it Tlingit. It's an office building. It has offices. It functions similar to the other building. It's in town on property similarly, but it makes it Tlingit, and I think it's really cool. It still looks like an office building, but I think it's great that this is becoming something different, and that is.
Another thing is the Sea Alaska logo was designed by someone who's not indigenous, and they at one point tried to change it, but they didn't.
The red one?
The like it's up there on the building.
Oh yeah, up
corner there.
Up in above the entry.
Oh no, sorry, on the corporate building.
Oh the corporate one.
Yeah,
I didn't.
that logo, the little.
Oh, I didn't know that.
I think it was made by someone who's not indigenous.
Oh, I didn't realize that. Oh wow, yeah, I didn't even know that. Yeah, I was a little worried because I thought you meant the kind of the red panels, because in the early designs we actually did just do a placeholder that was just kind of generic, but then that artist was hired later, so I was worried some people were pretty freaked out about just a placeholder design, so we didn't want to impose our design. But the piece of that slide is basically the trajectory we're on. So that begs to ask the question of what about architecture without architects, without us people with the glasses on? There is a book, of course, you can put yourself to sleep with it at night. It's a really great read. But basically it comes back to Jane Jacobs' comment that when you give people the power, when you take out things like big money, like that development in the Compton, and you let a complex group design something, it becomes really rich and diverse. And it's pretty incredible. There's some incredible world architecture in this book in particular. So I don't want to say that we're doomed or anything. So that I myself, hopefully anyway, that I do serve a purpose, if you will. So hopefully it's not with the old ways of thinking, and that we embrace things like group and collaborative design. So to the nerdy teapot, this is a really inspiring architect that came and spoke at my university, but Michael Graves was, they called him one of the big five in New York, and super influential in the early 80s. He was a very well-known architect and had a successful career all on his own. He had designed this teapot, and one of his big things too for this teapot was it was supposed to be elegant and ergonomic, which was kind of a new term at the time. So it was easy to use. It's got that oversized handle, but it's in a beautiful way. That sort of thing makes it easier to grip if you don't have the grip strength. That's kind of ergonomics. So he was kind of already on the trajectory, but he got a severe infection that left him paralyzed and put him in the hospital and changed his perspective. And that's the main lesson of this whole thing, is that architects are supposed to not think from their perspective, and they're supposed to change their perspective. He thought the hospital was too ugly for him to die in. So again, that's that egotistical architect in a way, but he said he wouldn't die there. And so he essentially redesigned everything, but he had a really good heart. And he redesigned The wheelchair, patented in 1933, it's still around. It's got a lot of flaws. It's hard for the person pushing it. It doesn't store well in the hospital. You have to create more space. And then the person using it, it's meant for them to stay there. It's much easier to get out of something when you have a different sort of grip and you can change your grip and you can use different strengths. So he rethought this, and they also slide into each other and stack in a tighter way. IV pole built into it, all these things. So he's got incredible. He basically has a whole hospital line that they've redesigned. Same thing with the Americans with Disabilities Act. The guy in the upper corner, of course, is the actor, but Robert Pimentel. This is a fantastic movie if you want to watch it. Vietnam veteran, he wanted to go into public speaking. The professor told him he didn't have anything to speak about, and so he got mad and went to Vietnam, and then of course came back with something to speak about, but he came back deaf. He had a bomb went off in his near him, and so he lost his hearing, or at least had severe hearing damage. That he could understand certain people and certain kind of noises and sounds, and then he learned to read lips, of course, and he became really good friends with the guy in the top right. Of course, this is the actors, but a paraplegic that had difficulty speaking, but they could kind of only understand each other, and he completely changed his perspective and was probably one of the major pioneers of the Americans with Disabilities Act, because he got to see the treatment of people with disabilities. And this is a really heartwarming and amazing movie because it did transform the design world and the whole world we live in. So again, just saying, if you want to get involved, please come talk to me or talk to any of these organizations. These are CBJ ones if you want to be involved in your city in particular. And then of course there's so many advocacy groups around town. So we've got a little bit of time for some questions if you guys want to stick around. Yeah, thanks.
Where are your glasses?
I know. I just don't need contacts either. I don't need them. I think I'll graduate someday into the circular glasses, I guess. Yeah.
As your presenter, I was wondering, have you seen any changes or strides? I mean, when I was going to school, I didn't see any model of inclusivity or intersectionality models, but I'm curious